stability, sometimes you don't want to sacrifice stability for innovation. I think that, especially from a financial perspective, sometimes stability, and it's why some companies still do things on a spreadsheet because they don't want to lose. I understand this now. This works. It hasn't failed me yet. This thing could fail me. So I think stability maybe over innovation sometimes.
You're listening to the Building Better Futures podcast, where innovation meets inspiration. In each episode, host Eric Hurani journeys alongside notable thought leaders who are shaping the future, cultivating exceptional work cultures, and nurturing the next generation of trailblazers. We aim to spark inspiration by engaging in dialogue with leaders from groundbreaking companies, innovative projects, and exceptional teams. Our goal is to empower individuals to positively impact those around them and leave a lasting legacy of positive change in our communities and society at large. Let's dive in together and explore what it takes to build better futures, one conversation at a time.
Today, I'm joined by Luke Martinek, Senior Program Manager and Associate Vice President at HDR. Hey, Luke, how are you?
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Good. I'm excited to do this. I have a story that I'm going to share that I think I only recently even shared with you, but I'm going to wait till later in the conversation to do that. So
now I'm interested. I got to hear
yeah,
this.
I know. That's why I lead with the hook. Now everyone's
Wonderful.
got to stick around to
I
hear
like
the
it.
story.
You obviously know what you're doing.
But I do always like to start the episode with some good news and gratitude.
Sure.
And so I'll just, is there anything like a personal good news or professional good news or gratitude that you want to share with me in the audience?
I mean, yeah, good news. This is such a typical one, but I'm very happy to be heading towards spring. I do like this time of year. I think there's a lot of positivity that comes from it, and just kind of people feel refreshed, after a long winter. So definitely grateful for that. And then just on the family front, my younger brother and his family moved closer to where my parents live. So everybody in the family is very happy about that. That's kind of a new thing to celebrate for my brother, who just moved back to San Antonio, where I grew up. So happy that him and his nieces are there with my mother, who, gets to see her grandkids a lot more often. So family's pretty happy about that. Otherwise, everybody's happy and healthy, something to be grateful for. So yeah, that's what's going on in my life.
It's awesome. San Antonio,
Yeah.
I've never been to Austin either. I hear great things about both cities. Do you go back and visit a lot, or?
About twice a year. Yeah. I grew up in San Antonio. I worked in Austin for about 4 years before I moved to New York. So, it's where I grew up, but I've been up this way for so long, it's kind of hard to even say where I'm from anymore. But yeah, I get back there often.
That's awesome. Yeah, great. And love, family's a big part of my life. You know that.
Yeah,
probably
I do.
my entire family. So I think it's nice that they get to be close together. And it's nice that you appreciate that and can recognize that. On the good news, by the time this airs, this won't be the case, but I am so done with winter. And I'm like a winter baby. I love the snow. Like, the cold doesn't bother me, anyway, or whatever the song is. But this has been a brutal winter. It's and it's we're filming this. It's the middle of March right now. It should not, it's 25 degrees or something. I've been walking all over the city because I had a bunch of meetings, and it's I love to walk, and you're just freezing your face off, wherever you're going.
Yeah. I'm hoping these are the last throws. And then, like you said, maybe this is airing later, but I think we're clearly, exuding the fact that we're going to be happy by the time this thing airs, that it's warmer for sure.
The weather is better, yeah. And it is funny, you mentioned it, but how the weather has an impact on I don't know, you just got an extra pep in your step. 2 weeks ago, it was beautiful out. It was in the
Yeah.
60s or 70s. And I was oh man, I do feel energy around this. This is
All of a
cool.
sudden you feel like you can conquer the world, right?
Yeah.
And anything's possible.
I always like to share good news, gratitudes. Also, I will say gratitude always to the guest. I know you're incredibly busy, and I'm excited to dive into some of your your
Sure.
background and your current project work. But always thank you, because I know you're busy, and for sharing your wisdom with us.
Absolutely.
And I think, I'll share as my good news, and as I don't always prepare it coming in, but I'm on the New York Building Foundation board, and we actually just happened to have a board meeting today, which is where I was right before this. And just gratitude for everything that the industry does, that the Building Foundation does, and it's nice to be a part of some things that support what's bigger than them, and the building foundation's like a great example of that. So, a lot of
Yeah,
gratitude for
nice.
the industry in general, because that's really what makes up the building foundation, but also the building foundation for leading that charge. And we support a lot of great organizations. It's very
Yeah, it's nice.
cool. And well, with that, let's get into Luke. So tell me about yourself, right? Your background. We just learned where you grew up in San Antonio. But tell me a little bit about that, right? Early career, school, education. It sounds like so you have one brother, you said,
I do.
or
I have one
yep.
younger brother. Yep. And I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and it was very they were matriarchal family. And my grandmother and her sister, like all the kids and their grandkids, we all, most of us lived in San Antonio growing up, and we were all very close. So it was really nice to know a lot of my cousins and extended family. And so I grew up in mostly a family of teachers, believe it or not. And so, like, they were in education, and they either were teachers or they became like administrators. And but I had one uncle who was an engineer, which that kind of starts me down that path because at some point it was I have an aptitude for math. It's like you're good at math, you should be an engineer like your uncle. And before by the time I was 18, and maybe even by the time I was out of college, I don't know that I put too much more thought into it than that. And so that's kind of the origin of me being in the engineering industry was just that, in San Antonio, I had an uncle who was an engineer. And at one point in time, he had his own firm. And I did what before he had his own firm. And then when he had his own firm, I got some exposure to working on survey crews. So that was kind of my early internships while I was still in college, was working on survey crews. So that's kind of where things started for me. And I got a sense of, what was ahead, but I certainly couldn't have predicted everything. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
And
And where'd you go to school?
I went to school at Texas A&M. Surprise,
Oh,
surprise. It's a great
are
engineering
you
school in
are you like a
Texas. And
big Aggie fan, or?
I am, but not some, there's different levels, I would say. And I have to be careful because I'm sure there's going to be some Aggies listening to this. But I have family. Like it was another one of those things where a lot of family went to Texas A&M. And
Yeah.
so and ironically, a lot of my friends went to the University of Texas where I grew up with. So there was that rivalry as well. I have a friend who's an aerospace engineer, which couldn't be further from civil engineering. I think we do such different things. He went to UT, I went to Texas A&M. So some of that still exists. So it's in my blood, I guess, to be a Texas A&M graduate. And the network actually is a real thing. I run into people now that I work for a much larger firm that we have that connection through the fact that we all went to Texas A&M. So that's pretty cool. So I went for civil engineering, just straight, plain, a little bit of everything civil engineering. I didn't really specialize in anything. And that was kind of on the advice of my uncle. He said, you'll learn what you want to do once you start working was the advice that he gave me.
That's great advice. And it's funny you mentioned, because I got to figure, and I'm totally making this stat up so nobody listened to it, but like 70%, right? I'm just throwing a number out there, but it's really what you described. Like, we're all just in high school, right? And you end up being good at math, and some guidance counselor somewhere says, well, do you want to be an engineer? And it's like, I guess. And then we go off to college to become engineers. And, no one really tells us a lot about it. And then the other story is typical, and probably my story sounds like your story is, someone in the family's an engineer, and that's your path
Yeah.
in, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of, how you get started. So,
As I got older, I appreciated this a lot more, but someone said, civil engineers are just like, it's what a city needs to thrive. Like they do whatever a city needs, civil engineers are behind it. And then I used to say this when I was not really, I don't think I comprehended the gravity of it, which was there's always going to be a need for it. There is some stability in that. I mean, things come and go in terms of whether it's how it's valued, whether, we talk about, hopefully it
yeah,
doesn't become commoditized, but to some degree, society is going to need civil engineers to be managing a lot of the things that we do.
I've never heard anyone else say that except for my dad. That's like how he inspired us to be in
Really
engineering. He was like, yeah,
amazing.
he's like,
Yeah,
civilizations are based on it, right? You turn on the faucet and you expect clean water, right? Like that's not a guarantee in life, but it's like almost an expectation. But it's because civil engineers are, and not just civil engineers, but they're designing, and then contractors are building, and then maintenance workers and
oh
operators
yeah,
are operating. But yeah, that's how I describe it, right? We design schools so people can learn. We design office buildings so people can work. We design rail transit systems so people can get to work. We design roads and highways so people can drive to where, see their friends, and parks and museums, right? Like all of it it starts with typically some level of an engineering, or designing or an architect.
And someone's also maintaining it once it's built, right? Which we deal with a lot here in New York City, which, such the infrastructure is much older. So
So
yeah,
yeah,
it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool what we do.
I've never heard anyone else say it, and I'm so glad that you did because I do love that. And like my dad
Yeah,
raised a son, and I always thought it was a really cool thing that we get to do.
yeah.
Um, and so that's cool. So you told us a little bit about, background and education, and tell us a little bit like currently, like, what's your role entail at HDR? What projects are you kind of
Yeah.
involved
I
with?
mean, if
And
we want to leap forward from survey crews, I may not have gone that
why don't
far
why
away
don't you
because
give us
I
the
can
whole
know.
history? Yeah,
I'll leap forward and then maybe I'll go back. But
sure.
I'm literally looking at record plates for utilities right now and doing a little bit of that like visual survey around the Penn Station project. So I'll come back to that in a second. But I've spent a lot of time in this area for in the Penn district, either working for engineering firms or working on projects that are immediately adjacent to Penn Station, which is kind of what brought me to the role that I have now as senior program manager at HDR. I'm working on the Penn Transformation Project, PMC and team. So, but prior to that, I mean, I can, I'll fast forward as quickly as I can. Just, I specialized at first when I took my first job in Austin, Texas. It was water resources engineering. I had appreciated, doing modeling for sewers and for water detention systems, and I designed like one wall when I was down there under heavy supervision from somebody that really I probably over reinforced this retaining wall at some point because we were so conservative with the calculations. But I did a little bit of that. But when I wanted to move to New York, there wasn't much thought to it. Again, I wanted to live in New York City, and I looked online, and they clearly needed civil engineers because there was places where I could put my resume up, and um, I was coming for a St. Patrick's Day, actually, which was, a couple of days ago. I was coming up to visit friends for St. Patrick's Day in my mid-20s, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll get a job interview lined up while I'm up there. And I ended up doing that. It's with Langen Engineering here in the city. And I walked out of that interview thinking, oh my goodness, I think I might get a job offer. Now I have to do this. And I always thought that it might be for a couple of years. It would be fun. It would be great to get the experience. And almost 19 years has gone by, and it's really where I set my career roots down. So I've worked at a couple of other firms, and I've similar to my education, I've been a very generalized civil engineer in that I've done land development work. I've worked for private clients. I've worked for our public agency clients on roadway projects. I've touched everything from permitting to utilities to stormwater management. I don't really, that one wall that I designed was the only thing I ever worked on that touches anything structural. I haven't really worked on any major structures, but I've worked around them a lot. And then even most recently, beyond doing the roadway stuff, yeah, working at HDR has been kind of amazing. I've been blessed with being able to work with, real railroaders and transit engineers, transit planners, and having our transit agencies as clients as well, and learning that a lot of what I've done, even though it's not rail forward, because it's adjacent sometimes to the public right of way. Um, and they need to work with those other agencies. The experiences that I've had with those agencies here in New York City is of value to different clients, including Amtrak at this point. So it's been great. I've worked at a couple of different firms, and I've had different roles, and we can get into that if you want to. But right now, I'm actually just full time on a project, which is kind of interesting because it's been quite a while since that was the case. I did some stints in operations, business development, and I was a department leader for a civil team for a while. So I'm actually appreciating. You talked about gratitude. I didn't realize how much I liked kind of working on projects at the onset. I mean, they all have their ups and downs, and you can kind of get headaches working on projects, but I'm exercising that muscle again, and it's kind of nice.
Well, I will say you're like, well, I'm working on a project, but it's not just any project. I mean,
Sure.
it's a pretty
Fair
big
enough.
program, and
Yeah.
it's transformational, like
Yep.
in many regards. As
Yeah.
is a lot of the major infrastructure and transportation work going on right now, between
Yeah.
Gateway and Second Avenue Subway and Penn Station, and I'm sure I'm missing a
Yeah.
myriad of other, IBX and how that's
I have to remind myself of that. Is that some people like they can't rest unless they're working on a project of this magnitude. It's like they would kill to be on the project, for example. And for me, I'm like, it's great. I mean, I'm one small part of a much bigger project, but it's a very specific role, and it actually touches on every single bit of my experience that I gained over those 19 years since I moved here. It's been amazing to see how, and I joke that must be a magnet inside of Penn Station somewhere, because it seems like I can't get away. I need to continue working on this project until the job is done, it seems.
Well, that was the other joke I was gonna make. I love that you referred to it. You were like, "I've always worked for engineering companies in the Penn District," and then in my mind, I just went through, like, every single company that, like, I either have known you've worked for, but then
Right.
also, like, every engineering company that's in the Penn District. Obviously.
It is a little
It's
bit interesting, isn't it?
subset of
Yeah,
the industry is all
there
there.
there's probably a story there, but somehow we all end up working within the same few block radius, right? So it's pretty cool.
It's pretty funny, yeah. Very cool. Well, that background was great, and you know what I think is interesting about your like career arc, right? As you went, it sounds like up to the division leader, right, civil
Right.
team,
Yeah.
but are in like project management again, which is probably
Yeah.
just equally as big or hard because of the size of the program. And what do you think is like the biggest skill that maybe coming into engineering you didn't have, right? Like you're good at math,
Mhm.
but, like, that you developed that turned you into the leader that you are, right? Because obviously you've been a leader in a
Yeah.
number of different
I have,
places and
yeah.
ways.
It's so biggest skill. So what I'll say is, the first time I became enlightened to this isn't just here's a discrete assignment. You need to do this and get it back to me at this time, or here's the client that we're working for. When I wrote a change order for the first time, describing the work that we needed to do that was out of scope and assign a certain level of effort to it, and that translated to dollars, I had this aha moment. Oh my goodness, there's so much more to what I could be doing, working for a private engineering company. And so the skill was more like the business side of things, right? And so that, if you can be working, and I should say, like, you can be working for agencies, and maybe this isn't as much of a critical skill, but it does become critical when you need to understand the mechanics of the financials of a project, right? I think all of us at some point get enlightened to that, and really leaning into that and understanding those mechanics was critical for me to kind of grow from, instead of just working on design within CAD or things like that. I started to see, oh, there's another side of this business where I can grow and learn more. And so I think that helped me a lot in terms of understanding how to work better for clients, and to also learn, that I need to actually get something done in a certain amount of time. Because until then, I honestly didn't think much about the fact that it might take me 30 hours to get something done, right? And that there's some kind of time crunch here and some sense of urgency. So I also think that helped me get interested in business development, because even though it's just a change order, we'd already had the contract. Like, I thought, this is interesting. I'd like to do more of this, which, in later years, my prior role at HDR was I was a business development leader. It was full-time business development for a while. And that was pretty cool as well. But it was about 13 plus years between that change order and when I actually held a role that was full-time business development. So I guess maybe understanding a little bit of the financials is a really critical skill in leadership. And then that also helps you manage other people. When you become a leader of a team, you have to learn to communicate that, and I think sometimes if nobody was communicating that to me, it didn't really occur to me that I needed to be doing something in a certain amount of time. And then if you'll allow me, I'll say again, my uncle many years ago said, when you're on these survey crews, you're going to need to know how much effort goes into getting this information and what you have to do to pull a manhole lid off and put a rod down there to get the information, so that when you need to ask it of someone else, A, you know what it takes to get it done, and B, you know how to make sure that they get it done in a reasonable amount of time. So I think, somewhere in there, hopefully I answered your question, but a lot of those skills, I think I was enlightened to beyond project work at one point in time. And it really helped me grow as a leader into different roles that I've held.
Yeah, no, definitely answer the question. You just made me think of something else that, like, I guess relating back to my dad, but that was one of the things he told us. Like, he's like, if you're going to start to be an engineer, you got to be in the field, because you have to understand how what you're designing is actually going to be executed or built or procured, like all of those things, right? You can't kind of design in a vacuum and just assume, that the contractor is always going to figure it out. And in some ways, very similar to your manhole story, right? Like, if you don't actually understand what it takes to go into it or how long it takes to do something, are you just prescribing way too much, right? Like, to the point where it doesn't make sense, but because that's not free either, and like you have to have that understanding. And the part of your answer that got me super excited was one of our divisions right now is training like their next level of leaders. So we're adding PMs to this division. And the other day we do a daily huddle with the leadership team, and my director was like, yeah, so I've got them set up like on KPIs. They know what their billable rate, their percentage has to be. They know about utilization, like the dashboards. And like, there's little things that happen. And obviously it's a much smaller company that I, that I worked with or for, or have whatever. But it's like, to me, that was like the first time I was like, "Ah, feels like that's like a real company thing." I wasn't even involved, but that is their next step to being leaders. Like they have to know how to manage their people and their work and understand how long it takes their folks, their team to do something. And is that profitable for that project? And like all of those things. And it felt really cool. And you just reminded me of that.
There was a blissful part of my career early on where all I needed to know is I'm an engineer. I work for an engineering company and they pay me to do engineering. But at some point, and honestly, I think I always tie it to as soon as I got to New York, I think maybe it's a New York thing. I don't know. Maybe it was a
We'll do it to you.
timeline thing. But all of a sudden, the money is like there's another factor to this job, by the way. And so I learned a lot in those moments. Yeah.
It's a little bit because I think that's also interesting and probably unique to your career. But so like technical, right? Then to business development, back to technical. What were things like you did like and you like better about BD, or you like better about
Yeah.
the
I mean,
technical side?
the other step in there is the operations side because I did 3 years as an office manager
Oh yeah.
when I was at Sam Schwartz, where I went from being a civil engineering department leader to then being kind of having that role still and eventually backfilling it, but also managing 7 other departments as an office leader and kind of handling all of that. So I guess I from that moment that I wrote that original change order, I always go back to that because it really felt like an enlightening moment. And I wanted to learn. The next step was I want to be in front of clients and go to meetings and be the one that presents the information and comes back and determine, so that you have to kind of learn how to be a project manager. And so I aspired to do that. And I wanted to get more face time with clients. And it took a while to kind of get someone to trust me to do that. But eventually it was like, I can do the work. Now I can communicate the work to the clients. And then the next step was you are good at interviewing for projects, especially for clients who you've already worked for. And I started to learn how to be the key kind of person in an org chart and to write the proposal. And so I got, just the natural progression was I started helping write proposals, whether it was a letter proposal to an existing client or a new client on the private side, which is pretty straightforward, or competitive proposals, pre-positioning and all of that. I got some early exposure to that from a really great mentor. And if it's okay, I'll name him as a guy named Andrew Malik.
Of
He was
course.
at AKRF at the time, and that's where I was. And it really was just a great time because he was a big proponent of just sort of letting people get exposed to everything, whatever they want to try. And it's like if they're good at it and they like it, great, and we'll look for any combination of all of it. So I just got so much exposure at that time because it was a growing group, and I really liked a lot of aspects of that. But I saw what he did with that group, and a former colleague reached out and said, "Hey, there's this company I'm working at. They need somebody to lead their civil team. I think you should come take a look." And I was like, I'm comfortable kind of doing what I'm doing. There's growth here for me that I like what I'm doing. But eventually there was just, I think maybe it was one spring. Honestly, I think it was in April. So maybe there was just change in the air. I was like, oh, I'll go hear them out. I'll go hear what they have to say. And when I learned that there was really truly a need for somebody to come in, I thought, well, let me try my hand at seeing if I can take a small group of civil engineers and grow that, knowing what I've learned thus far. And it was really a personal challenge. And there was some level of success. I mean, we grew from like 2 to 9 people, maybe before I left, maybe 10. And we had a bunch more clients. That company could then say, yes, we do that now.
Yeah.
Whereas prior, they might have said, we can do planning, we can do construction related services, but we don't do design. When I got there, they could say, yes, we can do design. And so that was a really cool moment where I was able to kind of help build that. And then it was really it was a product of the pandemic that, the offices shut down for a while and, things were uncertain. And there just happened to be a particular opening that happened. It wasn't for any reason other than the general manager at the time got a different job offer and they decided to take it. And it was a vacant position. And I'll just name another person who really was an instrumental mentor to me for a while, Mike Shama, who I know you've spoken with on this podcast. Mike, same thing, really loves to promote leadership and really grow leaders. And he saw that maybe I might be somebody that would be interested in that role. And honestly, I learned a lot of it on the job. And I had another great mentor at the time, a guy named Joanne Verbone, who was the COO and CFO, who taught me a lot of some of the things you were just talking about, not just for my team, but for an entire, office, how to manage a lot of that utilization, looking at the costs, the overhead, managing a budget for general overhead. I think even at that time when I took on that general manager role, I actually changed a part in a sink because I didn't want to spend the money that it took to use the buildings like people that they wanted to do. Cause I thought I can pay $500 to have a P trap changed out, or I can go to the hardware store, get it myself and change it and save the company $500. Um, I touched so many things in that role that it was just so amazing. And then that kind of progressed into, again, like just another opportunity came knocking again to say, hey, you seem to like business development. Would you like to do more of that? And then when I thought, how often do you get the opportunity to do it full time? Like, I want to explore what that's like to have that as your full time position and contribution to a company. So it was a lot of good mentors who might have saw potential in me, and then opportunity knocking and me really having to wrestle with, I have a good thing here, but maybe this other thing offers me something to, and I like variety. I think, the generalist nature, I guess, which I have some feelings about that word because I think it gets overused, but I think I have to admit to some degree I do fall into that category. But trying something new and doing something different on a regular basis has kind of fueled my career for the last 20 years.
Very cool. And I think it's important and something that especially early career professionals probably don't hear enough, that try different things, right? Like we get so set on this path that like, even engineering, for example, right? Like you might pick that as a senior in college and
Right.
all of a sudden it defines who you are for the next 50 years, like presumably. And, within engineering, there's so many things we can do. Business development, like you touched on, right? Operations roles, which like don't really require you to be an engineer. I mean, it helps probably, but like, do you
True.
really have to be to
Yeah.
run a business well? Like,
My
maybe
predecessor
not.
wasn't an engineer. Yeah. When I had that
Yeah.
role, my predecessor was not an engineer. Yeah.
So it's just like and I do a lot of mentor programs, and I'm going to touch on mentorship in a second
Sure.
because you mentioned it a few times, and I love talking about it. But I'm in a few mentor programs, and the mentees are always like, "Oh, like maybe I don't like this," and I'm like, "Well, then find some like, dude. There's so many options for you." But they feel like, "No, this is my career now, and I have to keep
Mhm.
like I will be a structural engineer forever." And I'm like, "Why? If you love program management, like." Go run a program, your structural engineering background is gonna help you in doing that. It's not gonna be lost, but
Right.
go find something that's exciting to you. And so I think it's great that you've had the opportunity to like travel, like you mentioned it a couple of times, right? And you enjoy that variety and you love learning something new. In every role, I'm sure you've learned something new that
Absolutely.
has helped you
Yeah.
in your next role, right? Whatever that next role might be.
Even with what you're saying, it actually reminded me, there was a moment where my wife would remember this, where I was not sure if I wanted to continue being an engineer. I thought what I'm doing right now, I don't really love. Maybe, and it's, back to something I said very early in this discussion about my parents and everybody being teachers, like, oh, maybe I'll go be a teacher. And so for maybe all of 3 months, I kind of entertained that idea about changing careers. But again, I'll just keep going back to it. I wrote that change order and something changed in my mind. There's so much more that I can pursue in this career. I'm so glad that I didn't sell myself short and decide to pull the plug. I had just gotten a PE license. I might have been like 5 or 6 years into this and trying to figure out what I liked about it. But I have found so many different things that I can appreciate within this industry, that I can do, and that it just gets better and better. Like you said, whatever skills you learn and whatever role you have, you find that you can apply that experience elsewhere. It really is true. You stick around long enough and you keep doing something, whatever you're doing, eventually you'll figure out how to apply that to whatever you're doing in that other moment. So that's been my experience for sure.
Yeah, no, it's great insights, and I want to touch on the mentorship thing because you mentioned a couple
Yeah,
of great mentors, and like you said, we have Mike Sharma on the show, and I've known Mike a long time, and I've always loved him, right? Great, just person. But having him on the show, I just learned so much more about his background and like his life, and it just made him that much cooler, like in that
yeah,
sense. So
definitely.
what a great guy. But to your point about like even your uncle, right? And so, like, these were all mentors in your life, and I only like to bring up mentorship because for especially those earlier in their career, but even those later in your career, like, find people who have done what you've done, and I'm watching the show, The Lincoln Lawyer on Netflix. I
Okay.
enjoy it. If you're into that kind of show or if you enjoyed the movie, I would recommend it. But it's really interesting because, the main character is Mickey Haller, who's that, Matthew McConaughey plays him in the Lincoln Lawyer movie. And he is the best criminal defense attorney, right? Like, he always wins these crazy cases. But he has a mentor on the show, and his name is Legal, and he's a person that he always goes to for, like, advice and support. And, I'm bringing that story up here because it equates to, like, even if you're the best in the world at what you do, right? Even the best athletes in the world have a coach, right? Like,
True. Yeah.
everybody can be better or have, like, an outside perspective, and have mentors and have people that challenge you too, right? I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
and for some people, it's fine, right? Like, I read this book, I'm gonna blank on the name, it's like it's not Difficult Conversations, but it was something like that, I can't believe it's a great book. But anyway, in it, the premise is that, like, typically in an organization, you're gonna have 2 types of people, and both are equally important, and you're gonna have your people that are your, like, stable, like, workhorses, right? And they're really great at their job, but they don't necessarily wanna be promoted at every step of the way, Like, they love what they do, and they just want to do that, and they found, like, a place for themselves. And then there's also the people that are constantly wanting to grow, right? And how important it is to identify those 2 people, but that mentorship is equally important for both of them. Like, the people that are stable and maybe don't wanna grow still need advice, support, confidence building, like, have questions. And, so, and I always like to share that because it's not necessarily the most critical thing for everyone to always wanna do more, Like, I do. I am that way, right? I know that about myself. But after reading that book, it helped me understand a lot, like, not just within an organization, but, like, even in, like, other stuff I do that, hey, everyone has a place, and it's about figuring out how to support them best. And so I had
I
another guest on the show, and I'll just say this real quick, and then I'll
Yeah.
turn it back over to you.
No, go
Sorry
ahead.
that I spoke so much here.
No,
But
no, go ahead, man.
we had
It's your
another
podcast.
no, I don't wanna do this. I hope I didn't talk for that long. Maybe they'll cut
No,
something.
no, 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 no.
But we had a guest on the show that said something to me that I'd never thought of before, which was like, as the, like, now mentor in the room, right? Like, we were mentees for a long time, and we still are in some aspects. But as a mentor in the room, you now have a responsibility to go and find mentees. Don't wait for them to come to you. You know who they are in your organizations. Go out and support them. Like, reach out, have a coffee, talk to them about their careers, give them the advice and support that they need, but maybe are afraid to ask for. Because in their
Yeah.
eyes, you are now that giant, right? Like, the same giants that we had in our eyes coming up through our careers, like, we're now those people in other people's eyes. And
It's gonna be imperative for us. We've got a few more years in this industry. I know you and I are roughly about the same age, or in the same range, that we've got quite a bit more time. We need to make sure that the foundation behind us is trained and motivated, and that it exists, right? Because I think everyone's success depends on it, and societies even for
yep,
the need for
exactly.
civil engineering. You said something I just that it reminded me. I don't know why or where I was enlightened to that same thing about different styles of people, and I just remember one particular guy I worked with, and I won't name him, but I remember he was very clear. He was like, "I do not want to talk to clients. I just want to do this design," and it was so refreshing because he just said, "This is what I want to do. Put me in a position to do more of this." And it was like, we can work with that, And then there's other people, like you said, sometimes they're a little harder to keep motivated because they constantly want to be doing something else. They want to be growing. They want to know what's the next step. And then some people just really want to be very clear on what it is that they're doing when they walk in the office every day. They want to they want to have like a very defined schedule. And you just have to learn what everybody's strengths are. You just have to work through all of that. And one of the other things you said, um, I don't know when this occurred to me, but sometimes on the worst days that we're having, because we all have them, I've recognized that sometimes the only thing that might brighten your day a little bit is those moments of maybe encouraging or motivating or mentoring somebody else, a younger engineer, or doing something to kind of promote someone else, or impart some wisdom, even if it's not wisdom, just something useful or helpful. to another person that you work with. Because some days the projects are over budget, you're behind schedule, you lost the big one that you really needed. So and so's not getting along with so and so, or God forbid, you are looking at maybe having to let some people go, or maybe you're just banging your head against a wall because you have so much work and you don't have enough people, and you can't hire fast enough, and you're just having these stressful days. It's like if you are helping somebody that you interact with on a daily basis, because sometimes the people we work with, we see them more than our family sometimes. And we at least interact with them. So if you can have those good moments, like it occurred to me, like if I've had a good day, if I can do that, even on the worst days. And so that's one of those things I try to come back to. It's like, if I want to get out of my head on a bad day, there's somebody in the office that could use some motivation or some support. So for anybody else that's listening, I think we should try to continue to promote that type of leadership for sure.
Really important. And CMA Focus, again, one of the areas it won't be, but just happened a couple of weeks ago, and one of their keynote speakers was Rudy, and I wasn't there, but one of my directors was, and he came back with exactly what you said. He's like, one of the things Rudy talked about, and then Rudy, like, of the movie,
Yeah.
like
From
like college football fame. But like one of the things he talked about was how, the challenges in life, like getting that movie made was like a challenge in his life, and how he would always try to find like one positive, right, out of whatever negative or rejection he was getting about why they can't make the movie or they won't make the movie. But like he would walk away from it with something positive. And I think testament to what you just said. I do. We'll switch gears a little bit, and because I always like to hear about, like, the impact of, like, engineering is not done in a vacuum, right? And so, how do you get that, like, collaboration between, like, the engineers, the contractors, the policymakers, right? Like you talked about, like we have an aging infrastructure and we have some challenges, right? Like how are we going to keep all of this in a state of good repair? And in some ways we're not. I mean, it's just not happening.
So at a project and organization level, I use this word incorrectly, I think, but I always it comes out of my mouth a lot, but I'll say I try to, in anything, make everyone complicit in the same thing. Like we're all on the same team. We're all driving towards the same thing. Like, complicit has a nefarious connotation to it, but like we all need to be complicit in linking arms and doing this. And everybody, needs to work together on this, and everybody has a stake in it. Seeking whatever thread you can find in that is sort of my approach, just from an interpersonal relationship standpoint on any project or in an organization around some particular initiative, right, or project. I was thinking about, the way you posed the question, policy, planning, engineering, construction. What I tried to do when I had that role as the general manager for a bit, when I did oversee planners and engineers, I was in a unique position to maybe sometimes try to force the planners to understand a little bit of the engineering and the engineers to understand a little bit of the planning. And then both of them can certainly educate policymakers. Planners can educate policymakers on the benefits of something and the economics of something. Engineers can let policymakers know why you might need to change a regulation to make us do this faster and more efficiently or safer, for example, right? But it's our job to kind of educate each other, and then policymakers have the duty to kind of maybe understand, be complicit in understanding this thing, right? Not just say, "Oh, I need some engineers and I don't need to understand any of the engineering." Like maybe listen or try to understand the teeniest, tiniest bit that the engineers can explain about the why of something or why something has to be done a certain way. But on the planning and engineering side, I always found it was always, the planners always love to just be able to put the blinders on and be like, "Well, I'm not an engineer, so that's they'll take it to the next step." And I always used to think, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, wait a minute. Like, let's have a bit of a torch pass off here. Both of you planners and engineers need to be holding on to the torch at the same time and understand each other a little bit." So I don't know. I guess I don't really have a great answer other than, like, at a person to person level, I always tried to make sure that people weren't able to put up barriers, because of disciplines or categories, right? If everybody's working on a project together or an initiative together, there needs to be some little bit of understanding of the other person's discipline, I guess we can say, or their expertise. So at least in
Yeah,
my
well, I mean,
opinion.
there's no like right or wrong answer, and I think it's all about taking like small tidbits away, and that's great perspective. Is like it's almost like try to take a couple of steps in their shoes, and really like
Yeah.
empathize and understand. Because I do agree with you a lot of times, especially I would think in our industry, just because it's like technical by nature and, obviously liability is across the board concern, right? Everyone's like, hey, this is where my thing stops and this is where your thing starts. And I'm not gonna, get involved. But there's got to be a level of like, but we have to understand what they're trying to do and why they're
Yeah.
trying to do it and what they're trying to accomplish. Because, and I like the word complicit. I don't, it's like we all got to be complicit in this
Yeah.
thing. We all got to solve it together. And so, I always love to hear about what do you think has been a project in your career that's been the most impactful? Like whether it was to you or to the community it was built for, but what's like the most fulfilling project
All
you've been
right.
part of?
Impactful, and it means a lot to me. I worked on a series of playgrounds for the school construction authority as a sub-consultant to Grain Collective Landscape Architecture, a guy named Martinek. We met each other at a DDC pre-proposal meeting one time. We just struck up a conversation, and then he actually, like, we established a relationship at a couple of different firms that I was at. But there was one specific project. I mean, all the playgrounds are great because when they're like for grade school kids, and you're doing a grading plan and you're figuring out the stormwater management that nobody thinks about, but then it becomes a playground for kids. It's kind
Yeah.
of hard not to love seeing the kids play on it. Like, that's amazing. There was one particular project called the Learning Farm, and it was this ill-fated project that eventually got built, but it was plagued by changes in policy and requirements, and timelines, and then even the pandemic, right? But Runan and I worked on that project for so long, and it finally got built. And so when I saw it built, I was like, it was such an amazing thing. But over the course of that project, like, we hit one snag where they wanted to change some of the scope, and then we had another snag where the MS4 requirements for DEP came into play before they got into construction. So we had to go back to square one. And then the pandemic, like, it just, you could name it. It took forever to get it built, but it was called a learning farm. And it was really to teach children. It was this adjacent lot next to a school, teach them about agriculture and plants. And there was like a learning center. There were planter boxes. There were greenhouses. And it was such a simple idea and project, but the fact that it took us so long to get it done, I have a special kind of association with that project. And then, if you'll allow me, I'll say, right when I got to New York, the very first project I worked on was the Staten Island Courthouse, right when you get off this ferry in St. George. It was a cool project because there was a big parking lot. And when they did the environmental review, they found out there were human remains in the archaeological dig. So they had to leave a section of it because it was a former quarantine site. And they had to leave a section of this raised parking lot. And I had to design around the fact that that had to remain. And first of all, I had just gotten to New York. I'm like, oh my goodness, they found human remains under a project site. I wasn't used to that kind of thing in Texas. So that was wild to begin with. But then I designed this really cool drainage system that ended up having to penetrate through the walls. And I worked with this landscape architect, Dan Yannicone, with Matthews Nielsen. And he and I talk about it all the time. We had to get really creative with how to manage that. And so that was another one. And then I worked on a really cool project with EDC called the Hudson Street Streetscapes, which was just a wonderful, their first design build project that they had put out. And it was really a partner me with a contractor. I was there day to day. I dealt with the stakeholders. Like, it's at the center point of that entire project. And I met some really great people that worked at EDC at the time that I thankfully still work with, even though they've moved on to other working in the consulting world or elsewhere. Like, the relationships that I formed around working on that EDC project are always really gratifying for me. And it's a pretty cool district now when you walk down Hudson Street in that area, because they widened the sidewalks and created this great, beautiful, like, pedestrianized streetscape and bike lane and all of that. So that's just, I mean, I could talk for a long time, so I should probably stop. But those three, I think, are key projects, and they all come at different points in time in my career. One very early, one in the middle, and one more recently. And then obviously I'm working on a pretty cool project now, like we talked about. So, more to come on that.
Yeah, a lot of great, we go back to the civilization thing, right? Like impact the way communities are basically able to interact with their environment, right? Like you built that park and that changed how those students could learn and interact with that space. And Hudson Streetscape obviously, right, changed the way the community was able to utilize that area. And to the human remains, it's funny that and this is probably not my first project ever, but I was an intern at the time in college, and we were working at City Hall, and they had found remains. And I was like, is that normal? It's like, that's like, Seems crazy, right? But it's more normal than you'd realize.
They memorialize it because it was a hospital quarantine site from a different period of time. Like, I could be wrong about this, maybe the 1800s at some point, but they built this beautiful public space around it. They truncated part of the project for the courthouse itself and the parking area there, but they built this beautiful spot that now people can come and appreciate. And it's just built atop because we could not disturb below the asphalt, which is kind of amazing. So I have this whole, perforated pipe system that sits on top of that, and we had to figure out how to get it to the detention system. So yeah.
Another cool thing about this industry, right? I'll walk by buildings and I'm like, I know things about this that no one else will ever know
Yes.
because I was there when we
Oh,
did it.
and my wife has gotten very like I'll point at Fox Square Plaza in Brooklyn. I'll be like, yeah, and she's like, yes, I know you put in the drinking fountain. I'm like, yeah, I need to go by and see if it still works, and stuff like that. Or I'll point to like stuff that's buried, like storm sewer stuff, and like she's kind of gotten tired of it. But yeah, I'll see stuff and I'll know about it, and it's very interesting to us, and we'll tell each other about it. But sometimes our significant others or people that we know that aren't in the industry, they're just not as jazzed about it, I guess.
Not as interested. Yeah, I'm a quotes like mantra kind of guy.
Yes,
I love reading books. Do you have like a quote or a mantra you subscribe to?
I do. Kurt Vonnegut, great writer, love him. It was actually his son that gave this quote to him, but he asked him, "What do you think life is all about?" And the quote is, "We're here to help each other get through this thing, whatever it is." I can apply that to anything that's happening in my personal life or at work. Like if I can stick to that, it's the mantra, because that describes what I'm here to do, and I try to enlighten others to that concept because I hope that that's how they feel about me, that they're here to help me get through this thing, whatever it is, right? But I think it maybe ties into some of the other stuff we talked about. But I'm glad you asked that because I read that and it's stayed with me for again like going on 25 years at this point.
And like through everything that we just talked about, I mean, it's clear that that's your leadership style, right? Like, let's help each other, let's support each other, let's build each other up.
Mhm.
And so with that, before we get into the hot takes,
Sure.
I'm gonna share the story that I said I would share. And I think I
Aha.
did tell you this recently, but a couple of years ago, I was on the search for director of business development or like a director of operations. I don't remember exactly what title. And I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, and I won't mention him just in case he doesn't want to be named here. But I was like,
Sure.
hey, do you know anyone who's like really good at these things? And he was like, Eric, I got to tell you, best in the business is Luke Martinek. And I was like, oh, I don't know Luke. Who is? I didn't know you at the time.
Wow.
And so he gave me your name and I looked it up on LinkedIn and I don't remember the exact like order, but I connected with you. You accepted, and it was either like a couple of days after or it had just been a couple of days before where it was like, I'm excited to announce my new role. And I was like, all right, well, there goes that.
So that is like so basically that was right around the time that I took the business development role with HDR,
It was
right? So
exactly,
yeah.
yeah, it was like a
Okay.
couple of days before or after. And,
Amazing.
but and
Well,
so it's just like
I
one of
won't
those
I
funny
won't
things.
twist your arm. I won't twist your arm, but I'm very interested in who that person was, and I'll take the compliments and I'll thank them
I'll tell you offline.
anonymously.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
thank them
I'll tell you
anonymously here.
offline. I don't
Yeah.
think he has any problems with me sharing with you. I just don't,
Fair enough.
in
Oh
case
yeah,
I
no,
like
I mean,
to respect people's privacy.
I don't know that I'm the
Um,
best in the biz, but I guess I had an aptitude for it. So
according to this
that's very
person, you
nice.
are.
Excellent. That's beautiful. Thank you. I like that story.
All right. To wrap things up, we'll jump into a segment that we call hot takes, and I think this is actually our first time doing this.
Yes.
And so I'm gonna pick like a quick topic, and I want you to, your whatever first comes to mind, your honest opinion on it. No need to be perfect, just your perspective. So
Okay.
you ready for it?
I am.
All right. Most companies don't actually want innovation.
Agree.
Elaborate?
I think you spend so much time trying to get things. You have 364 days out of the year that things aren't perfectly aligned. And that one day that they are, you want that to be more days. But the more you're trying to innovate and change, the less opportunity you have those stretches of time where all
Days.
the systems are perfectly aligned and they're working. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm being a little bit facetious when I say no, but of course you want to innovate and go with the times, but stability sometimes you don't want to sacrifice stability for innovation. I think that especially from a financial perspective, sometimes stability it's why some companies still do things on a spreadsheet because they don't want to lose. I understand this now. This works. It hasn't failed me yet. This thing could fail me. So I think there's some hedging there, maybe in the way that I answered the question. But yeah, I think stability maybe over innovation sometimes.
And I won't ask you to elaborate on the last two because we're coming close on time here. But I think especially from your time as general manager and ops, but like, here's a thought, which is growth fixes all internal problems.
No, don't agree with that at all. Nope.
And then the last one is transparency is overrated.
I disagree. I think transparency is very helpful and important. The why of things, I think, maybe over that. I mean, some things, I think it depends, just like everything else, right? Air quote, it depends. But I think transparency helps a lot. So that I'm a fan of it, with discretion, right? It kind of depends. So yeah, I think I'm just big of like why a decision was made sometimes is very important as in addition to the fact that the decision was made. I'll put it
Yeah,
that way.
I think that's a great way to put it, right? It's important to share sometimes the reasoning, but it's also like important to be steadfast, right, in the decision-making process when the stakeholders are. So cool. Awesome. Those are Luke's hot takes. Yay. I'll,
If you say so.
that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Luke. It's an awesome episode. Love
Thank you, Eric. Just
your leadership
felt like
approach.
great conversation too with you. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we would probably just talk about over lunch anyway. So I appreciated the arc of the conversation for sure. Really good
And
stuff. And
I'm sure next time I see you, we're going to talk about this.
oh yeah,
And we'll include any links to the resources we mentioned in today's show notes. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and keep an eye out for our next episode.
This episode is brought to you by Infinite Consulting Corp, your go-to firm for MBE certified project and construction management consulting. Discover how Infinite can help you build a better future at infiniteconsultingcorp.com.